Oh, Ichika, how does one get the title of the most hated quint in such a wholesome manga? Well, I guess that's what happens when you try to go against the church and the gang. Fans can be so ruthless. But let's get to the core of it and see exactly what happened with Ichika. You know, I find Ichika to be the most compelling quint. From the beginning she had this aura of mystery that made it tricky to classify her. Sure, she screamed older sister archetype, everyone could see that and immediately associate her with the popular Onesan stereotype we're all so familiar with. But as soon as the fireworks festival kicked in, cracks started to show and somehow this older sister appearance felt more like a burden Ichika had to put up with. Already this appearance was shattered and for the rest of the story, we were left to collect the pieces and fit them together. But even though some pieces fitted perfectly, it didn't mean they were the right ones. And so not everyone got the same image of her. Some people got this beautiful image, almost flawless even, others made it more slimy, cold and snaky, and some landed somewhere in the middle. But what image do we get if we put the right pieces together? And I want to start with something a bit different. I want to first go over her lowest point, her transformation. Why and how it happened and what are the implications of it? Does it make sense? Was it to be expected? Don't worry, everything will fit in place by the end of the video. And so, when a character undergoes a massive change, a significant flip in personality, you can always work backwards and find the moments that trigger this change. Tiny red flags that add up to this new and apparently true personality. Unless it wasn't planned. So the question in this case is, was Ichika always supposed to be a villainess? Was she always meant to become this malicious? A few months ago I did my best to translate Ichika's character book, link right here, and surprisingly but not really, it turned out that Negi simply needed someone to fill the role of a villain. He had Nino in mind, but since she was in so much conflict with Fuutarou and just went through a direct change, it wouldn't make sense. And so, by elimination, since Yotsuba was a no-no, Itsuki had some past conflict with him and Miku was too innocent, it kinda had to be Ichika. And when I first read the interview, I thought that it was pretty silly that he made that decision just to keep conflict in the story. In my opinion, Takebayashi could have fitted that role miles better. She was a past crush of Fuutarou, a far more possible threat to the queens, but I digress. I was surprised that Negi seemingly didn't plan any build-up for this new phase of Ichika, but also relieved in a way because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to find any build-up. Ichika showed no signs that she'd be willing to harm her sisters, on the contrary, she was shown to care for them genuinely. But in the scrambled eggs, we learned something interesting about Ichika that might just bring closure to this case. According to Yotsuba, when they were still kids, Ichika was the most selfish sister. She always got in trouble, stole things from the others, Fuutarou from Yotsuba, wanted everything the others had. But she was also the leader, leading her sisters, an aspect of her character which went up to 1000 after their mother passed away, and Ichika was forced to suppress her selfish side to support her sisters. She had to be the mature older sister. And so, wouldn't her behavior from chapter 74 to 84 be justified by the simple fact that Ichika used to be selfish as a child? That she just reverted back to being selfish after Yotsuba advised her to aim for what she truly wants? Well, let's find out. Now I want you to keep in mind this tiny difference between selfish and harmful. Nino is selfish when it comes to competing for Fuutarou. Yotsuba is selfish herself when it comes to giving up on Fuutarou. Itsuki is selfish when it comes to food. Does that mean they also harmed their sisters? No, they did not. Nino would give up on everything for her sisters. Yotsuba not so much, but she forced herself to step aside and let her sisters have their way with Fuutarou. Itsuki won't share her food, but that's something else entirely. We know Ichika embraced her selfishness after the scrambled eggs. Would have been perfect had she been the bell kisser, just think about how much sense would that make, to start her new phase with a truly selfish act. Not that I can show you a ton of evidence to prove it, but I digress. Ichika started to actively and visibly pursue Fuutarou. She stopped suppressing her feelings, stopped sacrificing her happiness and her desire for her sister's sake. That was her selfish side. Right? The first thing we see after scrambled eggs is Ichika telling her sisters that they need to contribute to the rent, otherwise they would be forced to move back to their old apartment. Now, why did she do that? Because she was struggling financially and had to take on any role she could find, no matter how small, random or degrading that would be, and she had little to no time to spend with or around Fuutarou, between school, work and study. She was tired all the time and was not going to get any break. Therefore her career was affected and so was her happiness. This was the start of Ichika's selfishness. But was her first decision really selfish? Of course not. If you give it some thought, it was the right thing to do. We could even make a case that the other queens were selfish because they didn't think of helping Ichika with the rent. They got to live life the way they wanted, free of any responsibilities. I mean, they considered it once, but never got around to actually do it until Ichika said it. Although, keep in mind that they never worked before, so they are not exactly to blame as they had no knowledge regarding living costs, Maruo providing them with everything they needed. All in all, Ichika's first selfish decision, let's just call it like that, gave her more free time to pursue the things she wanted. And what's that she desires the most? Fuutarou. Chapter 74 opens up with that thing exactly. With her new conviction and extra free time, Ichika chose to surprise Fuutarou with a failed coffee attempt. She tried. However, she now has the time to just be around him. But here's something interesting. What happened during the time she wasn't around? During the time only her sisters could spend time with Fuutarou. Nino confessed her love, Fuutarou saw through Miku's disguise, he got closer to Itsuki and now he jokes about how she's always eating, knows that Yotsuba's always talking the loudest, talks about how Nino works at the same place he does, how Miku works at the bakery across the street. In other words, Ichika sees how close Fuutarou has gotten to her sisters but not to herself. During all the time she was away, she fell behind. As she says it herself, everything moved along without me. And so she thinks that Fuutarou is getting further and further away from her, far enough that she might just lose him. Even though she now tries her hardest, Yotsuba points out that she went out of her way to get Fuutarou a special drink, it's just seemingly too late. However, a simple compliment from him is enough to get Ichika back on the right tracks. So on track that she even wonders if she's trying too much. She does emanate empathetic energy after all. And then, this happens. When you read it the first time, it's definitely a bit of a shock, but when you read it again and again, it seems like it's not that big of a deal after all, just Ichika's way to confess. But when you read it once more, you realize that this twist that came out of nowhere, came out of nowhere. Before I go into the why section, let's go over the next chapter, 75. Here you'll see that Ichika is completely nuts. Her eyes are crazy, she talks about how she's taken out the competition, she's going to give him a present, destroy these sisters that are apparently her arch enemies. She mocks Nino, literally goes into yandere mode, just read these bubbles. None of you understands Fuutarou, he'll obviously like my present the most. Where is this even coming from? Sure, Ichika suppresses her feelings, but this is just malicious. She annihilates Miku, constantly mocks Nino, manipulates Yotsuba, Itsuki is a character. Why would Ichika think that taking Miku out or taking out everyone would simply make Fuutarou focus on her and give her all his attention? This lie is so incredibly silly it cannot last more than a single week, if even that. But here comes the biggest inconsistency and the biggest problem I have with Negi's choice of writing. Silly flashbacks. We got this little scene where Yotsuba talks about how selfish Ichika was as a child and how she had to set that selfishness aside, or rather lock it behind the door, and become a responsible sister after their mother passed away. This implies, or rather states, that Ichika is actually quite selfish, but again, has to control this selfishness for her sister's sake. Right? Well, if Ichika was always selfish, or a bit selfish if you want, and was just hiding her true self, how come she reverted back to her usual personality after chapter 84? Why was there not an ounce of development involved? Why there was no hint of selfishness after the time skip? Actually, you know what? Why there was no hint of selfishness before that conversation with Yotsuba? Why was it only that malicious between chapter 74 and 84? Obviously, because Negi simply needed a villain, and of course Ichika was in a much needed nerf if she was not to be the bride. But more on that later. Here comes the heavy part of the video. Let's look at Ichika's actions pre-chapter 74. Maybe there is a trace, however slim, where this malicious seed was planted. Maybe she was always selfish and I or we just ignored it. And if I miss something, feel free to point it out. I don't know everything about the queens, I just know what I know. A good starting point is actually when they were kids. From her conversation with Yotsuba, that mini flashback, and from Yotsuba's flashbacks, that's right, flashbacks, we learned that Ichika used to be the leader of the queens and a mean, selfish bastard. However, following her mother's dying wish for the queens to always stick together, she changed. She grew up, became a role model caring for her sisters. Of course, Ichika harming her sisters undermines her early growth and goes against her mother's dying wish, so already it's an odd thing to happen. But here is Ichika in chapter 8, the Fireworks Festival, the moment when we get a bit more context to her character beyond the usual teasing and snarky remarks. And well, she is kind of selfish in this situation, isn't she? She would rather put her work first than watch the fireworks together with her sisters. And this is Ichika's first dilemma. We see her going back and forth between watching the fireworks and attending the audition. On the one hand, the queens always watch the fireworks together since they were kids, and on the other, this audition is a crucial moment for her career. But actually, neither of these two matters. We see towards the end of chapter 11 that she doesn't want to miss the fireworks, but she thinks that this job would give her the confidence to act as a true big sister. She thinks she's not good enough to have that role yet. How could she act as the older sister when she didn't accomplish anything? This isn't about choosing the fireworks or the audition, it's about how she can become a better older sister. At the end of the arc, Ichika apologizes for how things turned out, everyone kind of takes part of the blame, they laugh, they're happy, and when Ichika and Miku pick the same firework, is when Ichika's growth kicks in. She lets Miku have it because she is the older sister. It's time to act like one. Of course, that firework is also foreshadowing for Fuutarou, but that's something else entirely. Following that, in chapter 13, true to her nature, she helps everyone exchange emails, congratulates Miku she got closer to Fuutarou. Chapter 17, wing woman for Miku. Chapter 18, talks to Fuutarou about Itsuki's problem and pushes him forward. I mean, literally, you won't find a chapter after the fireworks that has Ichika in where she doesn't do something to help her sisters, or Fuutarou, or both at the same time. I challenge you to try. The end of the Fireworks Festival is also when Ichika gets a crush on Fuutarou, and from there on she only falls more and more in love. The legend that binds is where things get a bit more interesting, especially in chapter 24 when, debatable of course, she was either just about to kiss Fuutarou or was just admiring a sleeping beauty. Pick your poison, but I'd say it was still rather early for a kiss even for Ichika. Throughout the arc, she gives advice to Fuutarou regarding the queens and to Miku about Fuutarou, but the highlight for Ichika is her dance with Fuutarou. Remember that she also has feelings for him, which get a bit hurt when she calls it quits in chapter 27. But my god, they have flawless chemistry. And here's also where Ichika's second dilemma kicks in. She wants Futarou's attention. She has genuine feelings for him at this point. He is the one she can truly rely on, be vulnerable around, but she's also the big sister. She can't just snatch him when Miku's also madly in love with him. And so she thinks about her career, about quitting school and focus on what she really wants to pursue in life, and that way, her feelings won't get in Miku's path for happiness. We see just how much Miku's feelings mean to Ichika when they're about to dance, and Fuutarou tells her about the legend. Unknown to Ichika, the couples who dance at the campfire will be bound for life. And so she panics. That was not her intention. She regrets it and later apologizes to Miku, even drinks the hot matcha soda which, although disgusting, she appreciates it. And then, this is important, they have a mutual agreement that both should do what they want when it comes to Fuutarou. And this is the next step. Ichika chooses to stay. She accepts her feeling she's going to try her shot at Fuutarou. From this point onwards, it should be fair game, right? While Ichika is still considering Miku's feelings, they have agreed to do what they want after all, so we should be alright. And this is marvelously portrayed in chapter 38, one of my favorites, where Kiku, the game master, the icebreaker, makes Miku and Ichika act without barriers. Miku has no brace, while Ichika still holds back ever so slightly in front of Miku. She's not yet ready to go all out. In the 7 goodbye, she again shows her support when she teams up with Fuutarou to help Yotsuba's truck team problem, and that marks the end of a chapter for Ichika. So far, she has come to an agreement with Miku that they can both try their luck with Fuutarou, and even though Ichika is committed to getting Fuutarou to notice her, she's not yet comfortable doing it in front of Miku. That being said, so far there hasn't been any moment where Ichika has acted selfishly. So let's flip the page to the next chapter. The first spring kicks in and with it Ichika struggles. But before that, it's important to point out that she still supports Miku, suggesting that she should be the one to kiss Fuutarou, even though Ichika clearly wanted to do it herself. Ichika is now providing for her sisters. She pays for the rent on top of every expense her and her sisters need, even that pile of chocolate Miku wanted for Valentine's Day, in the other parts that she kept buying again and again. She takes on extra work on top of school and on top of studying, and a bunch of people say she only did it so she can still be around Fuutarou. Come on now, you can't forget the fact that this way she would only spend a brief amount of time with Fuutarou, which would be during their study sessions where everyone is present. She did it because she wanted everyone to be around, and she did it because she is the older sister. Even Fuutarou is a bit hard on her because she can no longer give 100% to studying. Of course, she does go the extra mile and study tirelessly to pass her exam, but more on that later. She tells Fuutarou that the cost of everyday life is more expensive than she imagined, so she's got to take whatever work she can get to give her sisters the easy life. Does that sound selfish to you? Yes, according to Negi, but no, it doesn't. Ichika was so caught up in her busy life that she even forgot about Valentine's Day, and the first thing she does is check on Miku. She finds Miku struggling to make chocolate for Fuutarou and she immediately hooks her up with the best chef, Nino, again supporting her. What does Miku do in return? She says she won't wait for Ichika. Like bruh, at least say thanks. During Ichika's last exam side, we get some extra context and we learn that, on top of helping Miku, she also stopped Fuutarou from disturbing their cooking session, paid for his ABC book, and this time got some well-deserved recognition from Fuutarou. That on top, she fell for him even harder. We also get more context on her conversation with Miku. Right, she says it's first come first served and she will pass with the highest score. Ichika as always motivates her but also tells her that she won't hold back either, so it's another fair and square competition between them. No lies, no harm has been done, no plotting, just fair and square. And on top of the extra work, school and study sessions, Ichika scored the highest. I hear people already saying how Ichika got in Miku's way, how she cockblocked her confession. Guys, nobody stopped Miku from scoring the highest. She got plenty of free time to study. Ichika didn't sabotage Miku, she just worked harder. Are you blaming Ichika for trying harder? Come on, that's just absurd. Chapter 60 comes with one of the best moments in the manga, but Nino aside, we get to see a different nuance to Ichika's struggle. Her feelings for Fuutarou are too strong. She can no longer keep them in check, no longer put her sister's happiness above her own. She wants to break free of her big sister role and for once pursue her happiness. We see that at the beginning of the Scrambled Eggs, Ichika views this vacation as a break from her regular life, from her feelings, from what she just heard Nino say. She was looking to put her thoughts together and decide what to do next. We can see that she is unpleasantly surprised to see Fuutarou and tries her best to avoid him. Throughout the arc, she never spoke with him without a disguise, and that was only because Fuutarou engaged. And so, like putting salt on the wound, Nino, of course unknowingly, talks to her about this guy she loves, possibly Fuutarou. This vacation Ichika thought would help her sort out her feelings has just gotten worse. As she says it in this panel, she wants things to stay like this a little longer. She needs time to sort things out. Right now, she is confused. And we can see the toll it took on her in chapter 65 when she's just about to kiss Fuutarou, thinking that maybe this extreme action would calm her down. Not a day goes by and Nino asks Ichika for help so she can kiss Fuutarou under the belt. And well, hurt and confused, she keeps her promise to Nino. At first, we can see that she watches her dad and is thinking of stopping him. And for a moment, she compares her love to Nino's and concludes that hers is inferior. She breaks down. She thinks she doesn't even have the right to try to aim for her happiness. Thankfully, Yotsuba comes to her rescue. And Ichika is still worried about stopping Maruo. This is super selfish, right, Negi? Super selfish, especially when she gets up to go and stop Maruo. Of course, they have a heart-to-heart conversation, reminiscing the past. We learn that Yotsuba was a bit naughty, Ichika was a selfish terror, but as she says, she grew up. And she did it for her sister's sake. Yotsuba's words to do what she wants reach her, and here's another chapter. But before that, I know some people actually blame Yotsuba here, but come on guys, I'm sure she meant no harm. It's quite a stretch to blame Yotsuba. What actually happened is that Negi pulled a flashback because he needed to change Ichika to change her into a villainess. There was absolutely no ounce of selfishness until this point. Now we learn that she was always selfish and suddenly that's how she acts. He needed conflict and for some reason it had to come from one of the queens because as we saw, he doesn't do great with new characters. You may think that Ichika's suppressed feelings just blew up, that she is no longer holding back and goes all out. And yeah, I agree. That's what happened for a while. She let Nino get caught, told her sisters to contribute to the rent, began to visibly flirt with Fuutarou and bring him little surprises. Although she missed the mark, she was pursuing her own happiness. And that was great. About time really, it's good that she became a bit selfish, it's character development. Finally she moves forward. But how do you go from this to I'm going to destroy my sisters, lie to the person I love, sabotage Biku because that makes so much sense, I'll never get caught, this sounds like the perfect plan. You don't. This isn't Ichika. It's just the result of a random out of the blue flashback meant to create a villain out of thin air. Back on track. Here comes yet another chapter for Ichika. Stealing the scrambled eggs, the sauna scene, where Ichika is now open about her desires, no longer hiding around Miku, going full force. And now we get to the part I went over probably a few good minutes ago, when Ichika's first big selfish move happened and her journey meet to the sisters' war arc. I want to go over probably the most infuriating scene with Ichika, when she puts on her Miku disguise again in Kyoto and drags Fuutarou on this path, desperately trying to prove him that they met before, and what was that even about? It's so stupid, talk about out of character, this is straight up pulled from another story with an entirely different plot and set of characters. Literally in the next page, Ichika is back to her older self. Like, Ichika never changed. She basically apologizes a bunch, her sisters forgive her immediately, and it's like nothing happened. Why even bring up that Ichika also met Fuutarou in the past? That literally meant nothing. It's never mentioned outside of that one scene and has no impact on anything. Obviously it was somewhat foreshadowed back in Scrambled Eggs on the roof, but that's precisely when Negi flipped Ichika's character. But at least this nightmare of a phase is finally over, and with Ichika finally saying her goodbye to Fuutarou, so should be her character. But is it? I talked about it on several occasions in many of my videos, which I don't recommend watching because I realized not too long ago that the audio is horrible. But that aside, the end of the Sisters' War arc marked the end of any possible romance between Ichika and Fuutarou. It was over for them. Everyone knew it, even Negi's unborn child knew it. And honestly, that was fine. There isn't a reason all 5 need to be viable choices until the end. Plus, Ichika really wanted to focus on her work. She is going to become an actress. Why does she need to finish a school she doesn't benefit from? It's just a waste of time, isn't it? On top of that, it would be a way for her to distance herself from all these troubles Negi created, breathe some fresh air and get on with her career. But not before she does what she knows best and helps Yotsuba figure out what she really wants. Push her to her own happiness. Another selfish move by Ichika, isn't that right? Fuutarou goes out of his way to get Ichika back to study and graduate together. He comes up with this indie movie trick and ends up giving Ichika one-on-one study sessions, which is not entirely terrible in itself, although unnecessary, but what happens is that their good old teasing comes back in an attempt to keep this ship from sinking further. Imagine if Ichika didn't go through her 4th yandere phase and instead chose to leave school to pursue her career, leaving her feelings behind for her sister's sake. And then we got these chapters with Fuutarou trying to stop her sisters understanding Ichika's struggle, accepting her feelings, after all the quintuplets bond is central to the story, and then have Ichika confess in one of their private study sessions. Sounds good, pretty consistent with her character if you ask me. Or she could simply be selfish and go after Fuutarou without going completely nuts. But well, she needed a massive nerf, otherwise she would have been too perfect. And that's why the yandere happened, an inevitable nerf which also messed up her character big time. But after she's back and the festival begins, I'm going to be honest, I absolutely loved Ichika's side of the festival. I think it was really well done and I was waiting for Negi to finally reveal Ichika as the bell kisser, as she should have been. Instead, she and Fuutarou have some interactions and banter which I did enjoy reading, and it seems like Ichika still has a chance, but then she says this: "Tell me who you chose so I can put an end to these feelings." Later that day they have another moment. Seriously, their chemistry is so good, I'm actually a bit sad nothing happened, but I digress. She gives him an ultimatum, to pick a drink representing a quint. And Fuutarou actually does it. And just like that, Ichika knows his choice. I won't touch on the fact that Ichika was clearly the bell kisser, but just so you know she was. Anyway, Ichika knows that Fuutarou is going to choose Yotsuba. And she's still acting as a choice? Waiting in her room for what? I mean, she knows. Does she not? Does she think Fuutarou will have a change of heart after all that happened? It's a bit annoying that she was forced to be a choice just for the sake of it, but whatever. After the festival comes to an end, we get those 5 odd chapters, which I don't really want to talk about, because basically Ichika is the same way she was back in chapter 13. But I will touch on the quintuplets game from the wedding. Specifically what Fuutarou said about Ichika. I can't help but wonder whether this chapter was written before the first chapter was even published. Ichika lazy? When? In the first 20 chapters? Are we calling lazy someone who worked extra, attended class and studied like crazy on top of that? The girl Fuutarou himself called hardworking and was proud of? Man, talk about ending on a low note. I am so bitter right now. Ichika is such a compelling character. If we would forget about her force phase, then she'd be perfect. I can totally see why she needed a Nerf though, but not like this. And so if we take these pieces and put them together, we get the image of a mature and slightly snarky person, reliable and always ready to offer advice, whose personality pulls people towards her, but hides a shaky, vulnerable side buried deep under the pressure of responsibilities. She must be strong-willed in front of her sisters, no matter what. The only person who can see beyond her borders is Fuutarou. The first and only person she can be vulnerable around, that she can actually rely on. Everyone relies on her, but whenever she needs to relieve some pressure, there's no one there for her. Until Fuutarou. And she needs him. She needs a way to lower her guard and soothe some stress. That's all she wants. Should she keep a selfless heart for her sister's sake, or allow herself a bit of selfishness and get Fuutarou for herself? And let's put this other piece in place and see... Oh, what? This neggy guy brought some more pieces? Are these actually the right ones? Okay, let's see. Pretty much. Ichika is not selfish. She's never been. She'd rather quit school than steal her sister's happiness. Her character development should have been about accepting and understanding selfishness. She had to learn to be selfish and consider her happiness. Instead, she went crazy for a few chapters, then reverted back to her older self, and that was it. Tragic. Really missed opportunity like many other aspects of this manga. But let's have a bit of a breather now. Change the scenery slightly. I'm kidding, of course, we have no time for breaks. Fuutarou was the first person to see through Ichika's confident facade, to see through her fake smile. She was always used to pretend like nothing bothered her, that she was a role model and a perfect older sister. But Fuutarou is not easily tricked by appearances. In fact, he might not care about appearances whatsoever. And this was the moment when Ichika realized that there is someone she can depend on, that she doesn't have to always be the one other people rely on. Fuutarou was there to act as a cushion whenever she needed and also there to assist her when her sisters needed support. And you can't imagine how much of a relief he was to Ichika. She was happy. Her playful tease, which had no trace of flirt in it before, was now full of it. She still viewed herself as the more mature person between the two. She liked Fuutarou around, she could use some help with her sisters, but he's still too green to be a good match for her. But that changes during the nighttime study session, when for the first time, someone rewarded her efforts. As mundane as a hat pad can be, she never got this type of recognition before. Usually, she would be the one who would reward others. She would encourage, support and advise others, but none would do that for herself. And so a bit of affection was enough to mellow her. She could get used to this new type of affection. They shared this unique bond of being the elder siblings, and thus understanding each other's responsibilities, that they need to be role models for the younger siblings. This shared bond makes their conversations flow effortlessly. Neither of them is searching for words or topics to bring up, they just come naturally as a result of their common views. Since Fuutarou is pretty alien to human interactions outside of his family of two, he seeks advice from Ichika, who seems to know the ins and outs of her sisters, and offers him the aid he needs to understand them, but most importantly helps him open up to the people around him. And because of that, Fuutarou developed a comfortability feeling whenever he finds himself alone with Ichika. The peak being during the last festival, which has some of my favorite interactions between them. It's the point when they are the most familiar with and knowledgeable of each other, leading into the culmination of their relationship. they truly confide in each other and that builds trust in the relationship. Because they both open up and discuss their problems, you'll notice that they never get in any sort of conflict. Obviously, leaving that phase aside because that was not Ichika. They've always stood on equal ground and there has never been a point where their flow got interrupted. And this flow is the foundation of their chemistry. Ichika's demeanor, while strong and attractive, is still soft and mellow when aimed towards Fuutarou. And while it gets him, it isn't uncomfortable, as it never makes him close up and look for ways to change the subject. More often than not, he takes it up front, which leads into another intriguing aspect of the relationship, being that there's never a need for one of them to be in control, or rather, it's never prominent in their interactions. You have Nino almost always controlling a conversation, minus the 7 goodbyes part. Fuutarou takes over in his interactions with Yotsuba. With Miku, he is in complete control, only Itsuki does share some similarities with Ichika. But while their interactions are usually meaningful, with Ichika they also gravitate towards being flirtier. Ichika takes control at times, then Fuutarou responds harder, making their interactions dynamic, as they both take the lead and it goes back and forth, which makes their banter the most enjoyable, to be honest. They're standing as equals, mess around, but when things get serious, they talk about it, openly and sincerely discuss their problems. Playful chemistry that turns cute and sweet when they want to. There isn't a flaw in their relationship. Thinking long term, the relationship would have lasted the longest. But as a wise man once said, Ichika never got enough fans to maximize the manga sales. Of course, I'm kidding. Or am I? And that would conclude my thoughts on Ichika. I probably could go on, I definitely could, but the longer this video gets, the less likely am I to finish it anytime soon. As a side note, I know a lot of people have asked me and are still asking why do I claim Ichika was the bell kisser, what's up with that, and to be honest, it just doesn't matter anymore. I thought about compiling all the evidence I gathered across my videos on this topic and kinda put them here, but like, it's kinda pointless, right? It's not like it's going to change anything, so I scrapped that. On the topic of movies, we did get some promotional footage of the upcoming movie, which is set to premiere this May. I really believed it would premiere in January, as it would line up with the first and second season dates. But then again, the footage shows the pool chapter, a bit fanservice-y, so yeah, it doesn't exactly strike me as a strong conclusion to the series. But I guess, you know, the hype really died down and they probably just want to wrap things up and maximize the sales. And that's alright, at least the series gets somewhat fully adapted. As for what I'm going to do next, I am planning of making a character video on Itsuki, maybe even one on Fuutarou, I suppose, since someone has asked me to. But obviously I wouldn't say look forward to them anytime soon. They will come, eventually. That being said, thank you for watching, especially if you made it this far, and I'll catch you in the next video, whenever that is.